I was born a couple of streets away from here in 1942 and lived here until I married and left about 1966. I lived in Thomas Street. My mother moved from Thomas Street to a satellite estate down the Shore Road, which imploded on the outside of the Troubles.
I'm the first of my family since 1860 not to have been born in St. Joseph's Parish, or St. Patrick's Parish as it was at the beginning, and then St. Joseph's Parish. We've always regarded St. Joseph's Church as our home church. My father always did, because all the family have been baptised and confirmed and buried from it. So I always felt a very close natural affinity with it, and his tales of Sailortown from when he was a boy have, I suppose, inspired in me a love of the history of the area as well.
Sailortown's boundaries were Corporation Street, Garmoil Street at the seaward side, and York Street at the city side, and Whitley Street was identified as the starting point. Where the end point is still a mystery, and as a poem of Tommy O'Hara's started from Whitley Street to God knows where. And there's many a broken nose and broken jaw where people thought that they were being left out of the area. Sailortown was a tight-knit community. My mother's sisters and brothers all sort of settled in the immediate area of Marine Street, which was where my grandparents lived. I had maybe a dozen cousins who lived within shouting distance of me.
It was a bustling area. You had 5,000 people lived in this area at that time. Protestant and Catholic, cheek by jowl. And given the fact that it was Belfast, Roman Catholic people would have called it Sailortown, whereas Protestant people called it York Street.
Most of the people were either worked at the docks as dock labourers, or they were carters or lorry drivers, bringing goods to the docks and bringing goods away from the docks. And the linen mills and cigarette factory provided employment for the female who went out to work. The docks also provided a sort of an income for younger school children. I remember coal mining from the backs of coal lorries as they came out of the docks, and we as children would hop on the back of them, scoop off some coal, collect it in buckets, and then sell it around the doors. But you know, it just went on. It was passed from generation to generation, and well, I probably done it until I was up about from say 13 to 14 years of age. People welcomed you because people that they didn't have an awful lot of money to spare, and sort of a bucket of coal for a penny wasn't bad business.
Quite a number of the men went to sea, were merchant mariners, and this part of the city was different from other parts of working class Belfast in that it had the experience of a number of residents who had actually been around the world. It was much more outward looking. The rest of Belfast was a lot more parochial and buttoned up than the likes of Sailortown would have been, and that's going back to the 1890s. When men under sail would have travelled regularly to Canada and to the Baltic. My own family, 4 generations, were seafarers, and their attitudes were different. Plus, remember, in those days when ships docked in Belfast, the turnaround time could be up to a week or 10 days. So you had numerous foreigners walking the streets of the place and in the eating houses, as they called them, and the pubs, which would have been most unusual for any other part of Belfast. An old-timer told me that you could have heard somebody ask for pig's feet in 6 different languages. I don't think I get that anywhere else.
Now, every street along here would have had 1 or 2 pubs at each corner. So there was a drinking culture in the place, but the seamen added to that. And as kids, and particularly when American naval boats would arrive, we as kids had a field day. because you just ran away, Mister, give me a penny, give me a penny. And then if he didn't give you a penny, he says, well, give me a bit of chewing gum. And then the question is, well, have you any big sisters?
Yeah.
You know, and could you take me home and introduce me? And so, you know, at that you were crafty enough to say, no, haven't. Have you any money? They had a May procession here where it started at the church, went round the docks and finished back at the church. There was actually a group of Filipinos who were stranded here. I think their boat was confiscated, and then these people were here that long with no wages and stuff like that, that they were part of the community, and they walked in the procession, carried banners, and you know, they went to the local dances and met our sisters, and you know, they were accepted as part of the community, and there was sprinklings of people through the community as well. So many seamen in this area that probably experienced the same welcome in foreign lands, and they brought the stories home to their families.
I think there was that sense of identity as well, that sense of difference. I think that's been evidenced by the number of people in the last 15 years who say that they come from Sailortown, and they would like to have come from Sailortown. There was a different identity. It was an exotic sort of place to a certain extent, certainly compared to the rest of Belfast. And there was also the link to the church. People identified with their local Roman Catholic Church very much so. The same way that Church of Ireland people identified with St. Paul's on York Street. St. Paul's is still there, by the way, and thriving, whereas St. Joseph's is a derelict building. The Sailortown area was a trial area for other parts of Belfast, in that it was really the first to be developed massively. Plus the people in the area weren't politicised. I mean, I'm saying that with a small p. It wasn't a community centre, it wasn't a residents association at that time. So people really were operating off their own bat until they'd actually formed a committee. They formed a committee very late in the day when it was almost a fait accompli. So really the Belfast developers said to themselves, we can do it here, we can do it anywhere in the city. The motorway cut a swathe right through the docks. There were literally thousands of people lived in York Street in those days. So the people at the City Hall must have realised that somewhere like Shore Crescent, which is a reasonably sized estate, or Twinbrook, which is a reasonably sized estate, we're never going to be able to cater for the number of people who needed rehousing. This is where the likes of Newton Abbey and Carrickfergus came into play, I think, in North Belfast. Promises were made that houses would be built near to the motorway, but people only realised that this wasn't going to happen as time had worn on, and they formed a residents' committee very late in the day and attempted to negotiate with the Belfast Corporation, as it was then. But as you can imagine, a huge body like the Belfast Corporation swatted aside any sort of complaints, and the demolition just went ahead. I don't think anybody was against change, and I think it would have been a good thing to refurbish the housing stock. But you only have to look at places like the Market and Sandy Road and say to yourself, well, hang on a minute, they rebuilt the Lower Shankill. It's rebuilt. The Weetabix flats were knocked down, Divis flats were knocked down, and new housing built. To look, hindsight's easy, and it's 2020, but I mean, quite easily both things could have happened. The new road system could have been put in, and people could have been given much better houses. Maybe not 100% of them, but a large percentage of them could have been rehoused in the same area.
According to what my mother said, they were promised to be housed back in their own area, and she was moved out probably early '69 and moved down to Shore Crescent. I think they built Shore Crescent specifically to house Sailortown people. That's my own belief. I don't have any evidence of that, but most of the people both Catholic and Protestant, ended up in that estate. Now, she still maintained that they had been promised a return to housing in Sailortown, and it was only when she got the shore crescent and probably into her second year there that she realised she was never coming back. It was a broken promise, and although she enjoyed living to a degree in where she was living, she always sort of yearned to be back down here, would go up from there to St. Joseph's on a Sunday morning for Mass until she was no longer able to walk. So like a foresight maybe, more than malice. I don't think they knew what they were actually going to build. When you look at what they ended up with, like a whole area was levelled to make way for flyovers and bridges, and underneath some of the bridges, the photographs that are on the pillars, and it's people that I knew are actually up there. And walking along, I glanced up, and Jerry Gallagher was sitting with a group. This was a colleague of ours, was sitting in his first communion group, looking down. But that is basically all that's left of Sailortown, and people will look at that and say, God, I wonder what they are. I wonder who put them up. I wonder why they're there. And I feel sad that there's no inscriptions, residents of Sailortown, residents of the Half Bop. They're just photographs there. And who's ever going to know them?
The clergy stood in the pulpit in St. Joseph's and told people that they would be rehoused. The fact that the Catholic Church was one of the major landowners in this area may have something to do with that.
It was the rope that was holding like a life raft for people. They were hanging on to this rope, and that was around St. Joseph's. As the parish dwindled, people moved away. They were left with sort of a derelict church. People still walk from the flats that had been moved to, and other places to go to a couple of masses that they provided, and then it was reduced to one mass, I believe. And then just prior to 2001, the priest, without any sort of consultation with those who were attending, just got up on the altar and said, next Sunday the bishop will be here to close the church.
And in 1935, in the Jubilee riots, St. Joseph's became the target for mobs who were trying to burn it down. And it was the people of the area who actually defended the church physically. There was a love for the place and a very protective feeling towards it. So we all assumed there would never be houses again, but that the church could remain as a focal point. And when the Roman Catholic Church, well, for them to say that next week is the finish, was the last straw, I think, for many people. People who had basically accepted the demolition of their homes and the diaspora around the city said, well, we're not going to take this, we're going to stand up for it. As young boys, you were told that your church belonged to you. The priest told you it belonged to you. This is your church. You were the people who contributed. You were the people who built it. And that church, St. Joseph's, was actually almost completely paid for by the time it was finished. And the people maintained it through all the years. And then suddenly we were at a meeting where the bishop stood up with the deeds of the building and said, this is my church. Now, that was a kick in the teeth. We're ordinary working class people who tended to believe clergymen, teachers, doctors, clergymen, never told lies. And suddenly your whole world is in turmoil. So we learned very quickly that property is everything.
If you leave it long enough, it will fall down itself. Because I don't think that nobody has spent any substantial amounts of money which would safeguard the building. We occupied it couple of times.
2003,
Spent
2005 as well.
A series of 3 days in it, and it, you know, it was. I had attended St. Joseph's from I was probably in my mother's arms, I'd imagine, until I was in my mid-20s. But it was only those days that we occupied on it that I really became to understand what it meant to me. I have photographs of myself and my sister taken on the old altar, which I will cherish until the day I die. It's a sort of a conduit to my mother. That those 3 days, everywhere I went in that church, I knew the seat that she sat in every Sunday, although the seat wasn't there. The seats had been ripped out and taken somewhere else. But you know, we spent reflecting on people that you knew, what it meant to you, and it just was amazing, the magnetism that sort of I got from that. I refuse now to go past it because I know it's on borrowed time, and that would be sad if anything did happen to it. This building and St. Joseph's are the only 2 remains of ecclesiastical sort of foundations of Sailortown. There may be only 3, 4, maybe 5 of the original houses that were in Sailortown left. It would be very difficult to recreate what was here in the 50s and 60s.
After 40 years, they couldn't be. George is right. They couldn't recreate because people have moved on nearly 2 generations, and like all working class people, they aspired to something better. People move on. I mean, as I say, there are some people here who are trying to regenerate this area and have more houses built, and good luck to them. But it can't be the same as it was. Because the same people aren't there. The memory is still there and the history is still being recounted. I think that's all you can ask for. I mean, no matter what passage of time you're talking about, things move on. Now it's cold now.
There you go.
I can
That
feel
was
the
good,
cold.
enjoyed that.
Yes, thank you very much. And Paul, I think an extra. I've got one more thing for you. Sorry, Paul.
I say. I'll be right.
So,
Is it for the check? No. Did you mention that, Joe? I never worked for free. My dad said you worked for